Hello, I'm Ward Miller, and I'm your guide today on a tour of the Arlington Deming district in Chicago. We're very honored to have you here today. I'm executive director of an organization called Preservation Chicago. It's a nonprofit 501c3 organization dedicated to preserving Chicago's built environment, protecting its landmarks, telling its stories, telling its history, encouraging holistic growth of neighborhoods through landmarking and through broader conversations to encourage a preservation of Chicago's built environment. We're standing in a really prominent location. This is Chicago's Lincoln Park. It's one of our largest parks. It's 7.5 miles long, fronting the Chicago lakefront. So in the distance to the east of us, approximately a block away, is Lake Michigan, a wonderful inland lake surrounded by lagoons. As you're seeing the North Pond Lagoon here, there's also boating lagoons and wonderful green spaces that extend along the entire north lakefront. Because of these wonderful parklands, areas to the west of us that are mostly residential, developed in the 1880s and 1890s, and those areas are part of what we're featuring today in the Arlington Deming tour. So welcome to the Arlington Deming Landmark District. We started an advocacy campaign in 2006, and the district was landmarked in 2007. This was a huge effort to save this district and to get it protected. We were beginning to see demolitions along Orchard and some other nearby streets, so we thought it was really urgent to work with the community and to work with the city towards a landmark designation. But this was a big community effort with groups like Preservation Chicago, and we worked with Shirley Weiss and Jane Curry and former Alderman Vi Daly towards a landmark designation. We were very successful in getting this district of 4 streets. So we're on Orchard, but Orchard, Deming, Arlington, and Geneva Terrace are all protected. About 125 structures in total, and then also 8 coach houses. So it's a really remarkable district showing this wide variety of architecture, all really of the finest quality. And we were so concerned about losing these kinds of buildings, but also some of the earlier buildings, like the frame structures that we'll see shortly. We're at the western boundary of the district designated area, and we're at one of the frame houses, one of the oldest frame houses in the district. So a little bit about the Arlington Deming district and this type of building. These are wood frame structures. They were built particularly after the Chicago fire. They were considered illegal in the town of Chicago, or the city of Chicago. The town of Lakeview, which was a neighboring suburb, which this was a part of, didn't have those regulations initially. And structures like this really represent that early part of the district. They tell a visual story of the district through time from the 1870s and 1880s, like this example. And these types of houses in this district are very rare. There's just a couple of examples of them, and they were most vulnerable, the most vulnerable buildings within this landmark district. And these were ones that we really wanted to see protected. This is an example of balloon frame construction. It's a type of standardized construction using 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x12s that were milled, and a system of putting a building together that really was popular in this period. And its attribution of this type of building system was first employed in Chicago in the 1830s with Old St. Mary's Church. So this is really a remarkable building, which again tells this greater story, a visual story of the district through time. So we're still on Orchard Street, a couple doors south of the previous building, and you're in front of a structure that's truly Carpenter Gothic. It's a beautiful house from the 1870s, 1880s, tells that story of the district, and you see this incredible ornament in the gable on this house that runs along the ridgeline. Really a rare example of this kind of treatment that's been preserved in part due to the landmark district, which is so important to maintain that spirit, character, and feel, that look and feel of a historic district. And you can see that this building, like many others across the city, could have possibly been raised. It has a masonry or a brick base to it, and then, as you can see, the sort of wood frame construction grows out of that masonry base. And oftentimes, this would have been a way of achieving additional rooms and on the ground level, or even sometimes an additional living unit on the ground floor when these were hoisted up in the air. So as you can see, there would have been an original staircase that would have reached to that front door, which is now sealed off as a balcony, but that would have been the entry into the front parlors, or living room, as we'd say, to the house, the reception rooms. So this is really a remarkable wood frame house and a great example of the early construction in the Arlington Deming district. Lions and tigers and bears all over this building. Oh my. We are now on Arlington Street in the Arlington Deming district. Different from what we saw on Orchard with the 1870s, early 1880s houses. Here we have a slightly later date house on a larger parcel with an amazing setback, and this idea of a shared party wall or a common wall between these houses. But it really does show you an example of a typical Chicago row house in form and in style, if you will. However, all the details differ, as you can see, between these two buildings. However, there is a certain harmony between the two buildings in their use of red brick materials, in the height of the entries and these sort of matching staircases, along with the setback from the street. These large gardens are really important and give one the sense of a larger parcel, a larger city lot. This is a remarkable example of a row house, and where you really see sort of the personality and the details of these buildings coming through, with this amazing bay window, with all of its original trim that extends outward to give you light from various directions, versus more of a flatter facade that we would see next door. Also, the amazing keyhole window, as we call it, on the second floor, which is highlighted by this burst of ornament that really sings, if you will, and draws you into the building. And then these details like the wolf and the lion and the bear and the fox that you see on this building really does intrigue one to find out a little bit more about its history and its original owner. But again, these are remarkable examples of why this is a landmark district, a designated Chicago landmark district, and why it was so important to protect these buildings. So here we are, a little further east on Arlington, and we have three examples of three matching row houses by the same developer and designer. And really what's important here is that these are so beautiful. They're picturesque buildings with their high gables, their Victorian influences. These are truly three Victorian row houses, taking again advantage of the narrow lots. Really important to see how these integrate into the district, and very much different than the other row houses we saw earlier. But again, Victorian Gothic revival buildings that really do, again, tell a story of a developing city, a developing district. we're on Geneva Terrace, and you're seeing 5 incredible row houses with variegated sandstone, Ohio sandstone, most likely Minnesota red sandstone, Indiana limestone, and another variegated sandstone. So here you see a perfect example of 5 homes all built by the same developer, probably employing the same architect, but completely different, giving an individual sense of style and place, individuality to the residences. And this is really important to help define the district and tell that visual history of the district once again, as each row house is really unique in its form and completely different. So among other details here, we have this incredible corner turret that's part of the design of this building, an oriel window executed in this sort of beautiful rounded bay and this projecting porch, which really does create sort of an undulation of these facades as they're sort of staggered and set back. The beautiful composition of the arched windows here, the beautiful railings, and the high gables on quite a few of these houses, and how they all differ, and yet they sing together. They're sort of one idea, and they work in harmony together, and that's really important when you look at this as an overall composition. So we're on Deming Place, and we're right next to St. Clement's Church in front of the Gross House. And I wanted to introduce our friend, fellow historian and preservationist, Old Town Triangle resident and outstanding member of the Old Town Triangle Association, Diane Gonzalez, who is also a Preservation Chicago board member. Diane, welcome.
Thank you, Ward, for that glowing introduction. We go way back.
We do.
Let me back up 1 second, though, and say a couple facts about Deming. You said we've just reached Deming Place. Deming was a street, according to ordinance, in 1867, before the fire. It wasn't part of Chicago. By 1883, they laid water pipes on Deming Place here. It was Deming Court for a while. In the 1880s, as I know you've already said, this was such a growing place, and people were just thrilled to be north of the city limits, which of course were North Avenue for a long time. And here you could build frame, as you've already discussed, but also in 1888, another transportation feature came to this area on Clark Street. Those pokey old horse-drawn cars became cable cars. So it was another advantage to moving here and getting to downtown. So Jacob Gross hires Edmund Krauss to design this house, as you already talked about. And who is Krauss? Krauss was a bit of a latecomer compared to some of the architects. He got here in 1880, he's about 21, came from Germany. And for some years he worked with Frederick Perkins. But then he went off on his own and he did this house, and I will say, besides the Gross House, he is so well known for the Majestic Theater and Office Building downtown. Now today, I believe it's changed names so many times. I believe it's called the Bank of America Theater. The little hotel next to the office complex is called the Hampton Inn Boutique Hotel. But if you think of 22 West Monroe, and it's a landmark building, a lovely building. That's probably Krauss's major commission besides this one. Krauss himself had a house over here on St. James, just a block to the south and east, a couple blocks.
This architect also designed a building just a little north of here in Lakeview that is owned by the Serbian American Club, and we at Preservation Chicago were able to landmark it with the help of the city and the Serbian American community and the neighbors, and it's a really fabulous building, and glad that both of these structures are landmarks or in a landmark district.
But maybe we should talk more about Jacob Gross himself, because we would have loved to have been with him, Ward. He was such an amazing guy. He came at age 15 from Germany with his mom, who was widowed, and she had 3 other kids. The father had passed away in Germany. They come all the way over on the boat. Gross hasn't been here that long. he decides to enlist in the Civil War as a private for the Illinois Infantry.
Wow.
When he was in Georgia at the Battle of New Hope Church, I think is the official name of the battle, he was injured and he lost a leg.
Wow.
So he's sent home, eventually builds his house, and he decides to go into what else? Politics.
There you go.
But he was
Chicago
so
story.
gregarious and beloved and very energetic despite this physical handicap. He was state treasurer, he was a clerk of the courts, he was a clerk of the police, and he was a collector, which might have been his least favorite job, I don't know. But he was also had a bank called the Bank of Commerce, Commerce Bank. So Gross made a lot of friends in his life, and he performed a lot of civic duties for Chicago in these early years. I will also say, if we want to finish up on this house, and you were talking about St. Clement's owned this house for a little while.
Oh, interesting.
And they rented it out to parishioners who needed a place to stay, as well as to employees of the church. And of course, they didn't hold it that long. And it's had many owners since the Gross family.
Sure, but you really see the Romanesque qualities, the Richardson Romanesque impact on these buildings, especially in this period, and especially in a place like Chicago, a new city, is trying to sort of define itself, if you will, right? And all this new influx of people and money and businesses and industry, and to think of this building in its time, it would have been considered probably a modern house, right?
Right, you're a good point.
Right, and we've sort of classified it now as a Romanesque house, but truly a wonderful building, so inspired by so many of Chicago's great architects. And look at how different this is from the other houses we've seen earlier today. The frame houses on a narrow lot, the row houses that are ganged together on the nearby streets. And here we are on beautiful Deming Place, where the scale, the size of the lots, the size of the buildings, their mansions up here, and we're a stone's throw from where we started.
Yeah. It's all kind of tied together.
Really beautifully.
Yeah.
So Diane, we've crossed Deming Place, and we've got an amazing house here.
This is 1885, one of the earlier ones.
That's really fabulous. And then the home of William Wiebolt and Anna Wiebolt of the famous department store.
Nice house.
Really beautiful, huh?
Yeah.
They had stores throughout Chicago's neighborhoods and at State and Madison. Diane, we're at 612 West Deming, one of the larger houses on the street. That's really a fabulous building in every regard. And I understand it's by Thomas Wing, who was an architect that worked with Burnham and Root, the legendary firm of Daniel Burnham and John Root, that were so instrumental in Chicago's architecture and its commercial buildings. They designed the Rookery building, the Monadnock building, which are treasured Chicago landmarks, a number of houses and a number of buildings that are no longer with us, unfortunately, including the 22-story Masonic Temple, which was the tallest building in the world when it was built for the World's Fair of 1892, and 22 stories, a huge skyscraper at State and Randolph, unfortunately lost. But you know, you do see so many influences here of Burnham and Root.
You mentioned this house being the year of the fair. The same year he was designing this property, he was down at the fair and he did the Moobridge Public Hall, which is a wooden building. I wouldn't say architecturally it was astonishing or anything like this, but he did that where inside this hall, this lecture hall, they would show the early movie. And some go so far as to claim Moobridge's Hall was the first movie palace.
Oh, that's
That's a bit of a
remarkable.
stretch, but that's another Wing. And Wing himself lived over here at Halstead and George, not very far away, for many, many years.
And here we've got this wonderful ornament that really does sort of emulate a lot of the principles of John Root, that movement of the looking for the American architecture, and H.H. Richardson's contributions to that idea. And it's just remarkable and lovely as a house.
Yeah, it is so lovely.
So we're now at 526 West Deming Place in the Arlington Deming district, and this is a house by Frederick Townsend, dating from 1895. It's a really remarkable house on a very large scale, and it's truly a mansion, and on a very large Chicago City lot. This is 55 feet wide. It's a little bigger than 2 Chicago City lots, and 190 feet deep. So that's extraordinary for the city of Chicago. And this is a great example of a Romanesque style building, and inspired by H.H. Richardson, so a Richardsonian or a Richardson Romanesque building of the finest quality, made of red sandstone, and the symmetry here you see is absolutely beautiful and almost perfect. It has these oriel windows, these sort of rounded bays on each end of the building, and it has these incredible dormers, these high dormers that are really articulated beautifully with these arched windows that was so much a part of that Richardsonian movement and that Romanesque movement of the mid to late 1880s and 1890s. A remarkable structure in every regard. So welcome to our last house. This is the Sarah Belle Wilson home, and it dates to 1883, one of the oldest houses in the district, and really a remarkable Victorian house, 3.5 stories, composed of this beautiful red brick, this sort of velvet brick, this limestone detailing with with terracotta components, and this beautiful original porch and entry. It's one of the oldest buildings in the district, and remarkable in so many different ways. And if you look up to the very top of the gable, you'll see this beautiful sunflower, this sort of sunburst ornament, which is very much in the spirit of the early architecture and work and drawings and ornament of Louis Sullivan and Adler and Sullivan, and so many of their buildings that have been lost, and also those by John Edelman, who worked for the firm. We don't have an attribute on the architect, but it's very much in that style, a really lovely Victorian house in every regard. And I invite you inside to see this remarkable renovation and restoration of a historic home on Deming Place. Come inside. Good afternoon, Susan.
Hi, Warren. Nice to see you.
Oh, nice to see you. What a beautiful, beautiful house.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the Sarah Belle Wilson House.
Thank you. So this is Susan Hurst with Bloom Properties. And Susan, tell us a little bit about this wonderful project.
Well, hard to know where to begin, Warren. It's been many years making the project come together. The first time I walked into this house, I knew how special it was. And believe me, it was a bit of a wreck. There had been a lot of water damage, plaster was falling, the columns were in disrepair, holes in the stained glass, and yet you just knew that it could be this beautiful place, that it had been beautiful and that it would be again. I know that you and the people who are involved with the Preservation Chicago are the same as me. We love old houses.
Absolutely.
And you know, we love old houses because we love the beauty of them, the detail, the craftsmanship that you just don't see now. But we also love the spirit of these places. We walk in and we can sense that this house has a life and a spirit. And you know, one of the amazing parts of the restoration has been diving into the history of the house, learning about the owners, and really bringing that spirit alive. It's been a fantastic opportunity.
That's wonderful, because you are bringing history alive. And you know, these stories are such a visual component of why landmark districts are important, why owners are like you or companies like yourselves come in and dedicate your efforts to these amazing restoration efforts. Tell us a little bit about the original owners.
Well, the original owner was Sarah Belle Wilson. She is the one who actually purchased the property here in 2 separate transactions in 1883. And as we learned about the house and researched the history and learned about her, we just came to respect her so much. And she was an amazing person, which is why we ended up naming the house after her. She came here around 1870 with her first husband and his 3 children. She ended up living down on Roosevelt Road, very near where the Chicago fire started. So her first husband had died, the fire hit, she lost everything. She was a 26-year-old widow with 3 young children and went on to establish a new home, eventually met Colonel Wilson, who became her second husband, and bought and built this amazing place.
Really remarkable. It's almost like there's a little bit of like Chicago history just stoked in the building.
Yes.
And it's not just, you know, Lincoln Park or Lakeview history, but it's really a deep connection to Chicago and those early years. And you almost feel that in this beautiful design and sort of the spirit of these rooms that are really fabulous.
Yes. That's one of the things that I think is so exciting when you start researching the history of a building and you realize how it tells us, you learn the story of the building, but you learn the story of the times and the story of the city and even the story of the country. You know, we learn later about the people who lived here during the Great Depression, and that tells the story of that time. You know, to keep this house going, they had to take in all kinds of boarders. So definitely you can look at this house and it's a beautiful house. And it beautifully tells the story of its times.
That's a wonderful, wonderful. Take us on a tour.
Okay, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
So we're standing in the formal living room of the house. It's the old Victorian double parlor. These 2 rooms here are related. And yes, Sarah Belle herself is here with us. This is one of the only photos we found of her. In fact, I think the only photo, and shows her as about a maybe 70-year-old woman. This is from 1920. She's at that point living with her daughter in Elmira, Illinois.
Sure.
But yeah, you know, one interesting thing when you start researching, particularly women, is it's really hard to find anything about them. They tend to get lost in history, whether because at the time their lives were not regarded as important, but also because their names would change over time.
Sure.
So it took a lot of work to track her down.
It was a man's world back then.
Well, you know, it was, and which was it was very interesting to find out that she was the one on the deed when they purchased the properties. It was done in 2 parcels for this house. It was actually her name on the deed, and we found that really exciting. And then as we learned more about her house, we learned more about her life, we realized what an amazing person she was. She survived the Great Chicago Fire as a young widow with 3 stepchildren.
Wow.
She went on to, you know, establish a new home at Chicago Avenue in LaSalle, where she took in sewing. She was a seamstress.
Sure.
And took in some boarders, and that's how she got by. One of these boarders turned out to be husband number 2.
What do you know?
Colonel John Wilson. So they apparently hit it off.
Well, and what a great story about a woman kind of reinventing herself.
Yes.
As the city of Chicago, a young city of Chicago, burns to the ground, or at least the central area and a good chunk of the north side and the west side, and then to have her rebuild her life as the city's kind of reinventing and rebuilding itself.
Yes.
I mean, that must have been an amazing time to be alive, and a frightful time to be alive.
I agree with you that it was probably an amazing time of reinvention in the city, and for a person who wanted to hustle, they could really reinvent themselves and reinvent their life. And in fact, that's exactly what Colonel John Wilson did.
Wow.
He was a very interesting person, as we found out in our research. He had moved out here from New Jersey, where he was an oysterman. And that was an exciting discovery for us when we unearthed that in the research, because one of our mysteries around here was this beautiful stained glass window we have in the hall, and featured at the very center of it is this beautiful boat. Like, who paints a boat on a stained glass window? Like,
right.
Why? That must have been such an important boat. So then here we find out that he was an oyster fisherman, and in fact came to Chicago and made his fortune as a restaurateur who specialized in oysters. He was also the first person to bring live lobster to Chicago, apparently. He ended up with multiple restaurants downtown, one especially for the ladies.
Wow.
Because that was a time where the ladies couldn't just go by themselves into a
right.
restaurant. That would have been unseemly. So, and he was known to be just a consummate host, He was known for his jovial nature. Everybody loved him. His restaurants were, decorated in the finest fashion. But he was an inventor of this new life for sure. So he was known as Colonel John Wilson. But we don't really think he was a colonel, Ward.
He wasn't a colonel?
No.
In the Civil War?
No. In fact, we believe that the closest he got to being a colonel in the Civil War was registering for the draft.
Oh my.
Yeah, as far as we can tell, he never actually served in the Civil War. We even had a Civil War historian look at this beautiful photo that we have of him. He looks quite handsome and dashing in his uniform.
Sure.
But there's a number of problems. The epaulette on his uniform is that of a brigadier general. The buttons on the uniform are that of a private.
Oh my gosh.
And apparently he's not posed the way a colonel would have been posed. That would be a very specific thing. So, master of invention.
What did Sarah Belle Wilson get herself into here?
I don't know. They've certainly had many ups and downs in their life, and we imagine that living in this home was one of the ups. We picture them here, and entertaining their friends. It was probably a house that was full of friends and we hope laughter, and it was certainly full of beauty as well. With all the beautiful flowers we see around here, and you've noticed the sunflower motif outside. So we think as they designed the house, that must have had special meaning to them.
That's really spectacular, and that's something that Frank Lloyd Wright actually picked up on in his career too, and people like George Mayer, where they carried a theme through the house and they united the earth and the surroundings to the house, and the house was sort of coming from the earth. So thank you. Should we go into the next room?
Sure, let's head to
I'm
the dining room.
excited. Thank you.
Main aim the whole time was to honor the house, to bring back everything that we could bring back, and then also where we had to fill in the blanks to make them in the spirit of the house.
Hello.
Hello, we're in the dining room.
Hey.
Hi, Ed.
There.
Hey, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Ward, this is Ed Vera. He is the president of Formlinea Design+Build and a principal of Vera Rice Architects and my partner in the restoration of this beautiful house.
Oh my gosh, you guys did a wonderful job. What a great team here on this restoration project. So good to meet you. I've heard about you.
Ed, we were hoping that you could take us around and show us some of the construction details.
Absolutely. I'd love to do it.
That's great, let's go. This is a remarkable staircase and this newel post with the sunflower theme again and these columns behind us. This is just a really marvelous space. It feels like it's the heart of the house, if you will.
It truly is a beautiful space, but it wasn't always like that. When we came in, there was a lot of water damage throughout the column areas, and then the stair was full of paint and off square. So the challenge was to keep the stair intact, keep the columns intact, but restore them back to their original condition. So it was truly a big undertaking to get everything back to the way we imagined it was.
It's gorgeous in every regard. So my hat's off to you both.
Well, there were about 100 years worth of paint on these surfaces, and it took probably a year and 2 different workers to strip all of it off, but so worth it. I mean, to see these flowers come back to life. And one of the things I just love about this spot in the house is seeing all the different flowers that they use. So this beautiful sunflower here, the smaller sunflower on the smaller newel here. And then when you look at the top of the columns, the sunflowers with the stems coming down and then that burst of leaves. I mean, it's just an amazing spot in the house. All of the flower detail in the surrounds here. It just...
In fact, in trying to source some of the missing pieces that were here, we believe that we found one of the original companies that supplied. At least they were around during the time of the construction of this home.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Really?
So it was really nice, and they were able to replicate some of these pieces for us.
And you really do feel like you're in 1883 when you're standing in this space and looking upward, and it's so inspiring. You almost want to go upstairs.
We can do that.
But as a builder, Ward, we have to start downstairs because there's a big undertaking down there as well.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Ward, where we're at, we're in the family room of the house. We're in the lower level where this was originally the basement. The original ceiling height was 7 feet. So we were tasked with lowering the basement by 2 feet. In doing so, I mean, the original foundation is a rubble foundation, so it's as a pyramidal shape. We then underpinned the original foundation and built it up to reinforce it. What that allowed us to do is take advantage of some of the setbacks of that foundation by putting in these benches alongside the fireplace, as well as setting the fireplace on top of the foundation. There are several examples of this throughout the lower level where we took advantage of the depth of the foundation.
So now we're on the second floor in the primary bedroom of the house, and we made a very interesting discovery. When Ed and his crew went to take apart this fireplace as part of the restoration, he found something really interesting here.
Yeah, I did. So when we started to take apart the fireplace to restore the firebox, we noticed on the underside of the main mantle here that it said Wilson Front Chamber, March 1884. I took a picture of it right away and sent it to Susan, and obviously with excitement, they gave him a good starting point on how to research the home, or at least from a date standpoint. And then the other interesting thing about this fireplace is that we were able to source the original stone back to Tennessee. It's a Tennessee marble, so that allowed us to replace the hearth.
So Ward, one of the last projects we have left to do at the house is restoring all these beautiful old pocket shutters, and that's been another huge job, right, Ed? It
absolutely has been. The pocket shutters are designed to sit within the windows, and then obviously you can fold them out to close up the windows. And so we had to take the painstaking challenge of taking every shutter down and labeling them on the plans to make sure they go back into the original location. They were pretty full of paint. There was a lot of paint on some of these shutters, and right in front of us is an example of one of the original shutters that was pretty dilapidated. So we actually went through the process of stripping every shutter down and restaining them, like you see on the next to Susan. And then our last challenge is to put them all back up.
These pocket doors are just amazing.
So Ward, here we are in the library, and one of the challenges we had in here was restoring these monumental pocket doors. They were fully painted and stuck in the pockets, and pulling them out was a challenge. The other thing too is, since we wanted to keep the original parts of the house intact, we had to also restore the original hardware that these are writing on. So this was fully exposed at some point to restore the hardware. Greased it up and put them back together. And then the doors were fully stripped and restained. And so now they're pretty good operation right now for a little over 100 years. And so we think that looks good. The other thing that we discovered when we were stripping all the paint off the trim was that the bullets up here were non-existent. And the flowers that you see above were not there as well. When we stripped off the layers and layers of paint, we noticed that there were some original circles underneath, which implied that there were these bullet pieces of trim. And then the flowers above, there was a piece of board over the fluted trim that you see there. When we popped that off, we saw the original circles there that would hold the flowers. So we actually replicated about 60 flowers or so to replace all the missing flowers. For fun, there were 2 original flowers that we did keep that we painted. And as a gift to Susan, I gave her one, and there's another one in the house that only I know where it's at.
Now we're in the Goodrich Library, and we've named it after a family that lived here for quite some time. They purchased the house in 1892 and lived here until the 1920s.
I did a little research on the Goodrich family. It turns out Horace was born in Chicago in 1837. And that's kind of an amazing year, because that's the year Chicago was incorporated as a city. And I understand that his parents arrived a little earlier, so they would have been sort of an early pioneering family of Chicago, involved in Northwestern University and probably establishing the town of Chicago in some way, and then being one of the first children, sort of, if you will, born into the new city, all right, as it was developed from a town into a city in 1837.
So Horace Goodrich, he became a very successful businessman, in real estate and finance. Also very active civically. I think helped develop the Chicago Historical Society. Like you mentioned, Northwestern. I think he was in the first graduating class from Northwestern.
That's fabulous.
And he lived here with his wife, Alice. It was his second wife. And they had 3 children here, a son and 2 daughters. The daughters came out in society, were presented in society, and there were a couple of weddings at the house. Their daughter Harriet was actually married here. Their daughter Gladys, who was widely talked about as a great beauty in society, married into a prominent family, the Logans. They were married in the church right over on Fullerton. My pictures of that day are just amazing. I picture Gladys walking down the beautiful staircase here in her wedding gown, and the whole wedding party going over the beautiful wedding at this church over here on Fullerton. And then the reception was held here in the house. So you can picture it just full of friends and family celebrating this amazing occasion. We also like to think about her having all of her wedding presents laid out on the dining room table to display, because that's what you would do. You would show everybody and what you had received.
You feel that you're part of history by just walking through this house, and what a lovely opportunity this would be to live here. And it would really be a blessing in so many ways.
Oh yeah, I do. I picture like what are the next years going to be for this house, and hopefully there'll be a lucky family who lives here and adds to that story and feels that spirit just the same way we do, and enjoys the beauty of it just like we do.
That's wonderful, that's wonderful. And it is amazing to see the sunflower theme in these beautiful pocket doors that we see throughout the first floor, and of course in the trim work, and again on the exterior of the building. And this really was sort of the sunflower was a sort of a symbol of unconditional love and faith, and that's really a beautiful tie-in to all these wonderful family stories and this Chicago history that's woven into the fabric of this house. So Susan, I just want to thank you on behalf of Preservation Chicago, our Preservation Circle members, and citizens of Chicago for your commitment to this wonderful house, the Sarah Belle Wilson House. Earlier today, we took a walk through this district, the Arlington Deming district. It was a district that we helped to encourage its designation with a lot of our partners. It's really an amazing district of buildings. This sort of encourages projects like yours that really recognize the special qualities of these buildings. But I have to thank you and your team for your dedication, for Ed and all the craftsmen and craftsmanship that occurred here to restore this wonderful house, this 1883 house built by Sarah Belle Wilson. And in these amazing stories, these great Chicago stories that tie to the Wilson family, Colonel Wilson, the Goodrich family, and the story continues with the next resident. And we hope that this type of renovation and this level of care will continue throughout this district and others. This is what we're about at Preservation Chicago, and our membership and our Preservation Circle and our foundations that support us find this so important, and it really is. And it tells a story, it brings Chicago history alive, and you feel like you've touched that Chicago history. And so thank you so much for your dedication to this house and your commitment to this district. And it's our hope that this building will be here in perpetuity.
Thank you, Ward, for those kind words, and thank you for joining me here today. It was really a delight to show you and all your members through the house and to share the stories of the house with you.
Thank you so much.